He wasn't supposed to survive. Michael Cookie Durso had already taken a bullet to the head. He'd already buried his cousin, shot dead in a club bathroom over gambling money. Cookie wanted revenge, but his mob family wouldn't let him seek retribution. Instead, years later, he says the acting boss of the Genovese crime family threatened to assassinate him. This is the world he came from, and the one he'd soon help dismantle. Today, on HEAT NYC, True Stories of Crime and Fire, we talk to the retired FBI agent who was there for it all, who flipped Cookie Durso, helped dismantle the Genovese family from the inside, and watched one of the most disciplined crime syndicates in America crack wide open. Mike Campi served in the FBI for 24 years, spending most of his FBI career in the New York division, working both organized crime and white-collar cases. He's also the author of the amazing book, Mafia Takedown. Mike, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you, Dan.
What a life and a career you've had. There's so many stories that I want to get to here. Wanted to start, though, with one that a lot of people are talking about, which is the organized crime connection to somebody we all know, Frank Sinatra. It's something that you talk about in the book. What is the story here?
Well, Sinatra, growing up in Hoboken, New Jersey, and he had relatives. His first wife, Nancy Barbado, was a cousin to Johnny Sausage Barbado, who was a powerful member of the Genovese family affiliated with Vito Genovese and Chin Gigante over on the west side. Sinatra's godfather was Willie Moretti, who was an acting, I believe, underboss, maybe an acting boss back in the day. And he subsequently was killed in New Jersey, but he was also a relation. So once you're attached to an organized crime family, it's not the associate's choice to leave. It's the gangster's choice. And so assisting, Sinatra obviously was a star, became a star, but his early years, he was unknown. And so as things evolved, you're with the Genovese family, you can't disrespect them. And so he did get summoned to a meeting, I think because of his conduct in Vegas.
Fat Tony Salerno is the one who summoned him?
Yes, Fat Tony Salerno was an acting boss of the Genovese family to insulate Vincent Chin Gigante. Salerno was a powerful figure, very well respected. Had a stroke, I believe, when he was on the administration in some capacity. But Salerno was also overseed a crew that included a George Barone. George Barone was a character that really facilitated huge amounts of monies regarding the ports of New York, the ILA, the Longshoremen's Union. And Barone was an individual that Salerno used on numerous murders. And Barone was summoned to be at Fat Tony's club like a half hour before Sinatra was arriving, and if instructed to kill Sinatra in the basement. And Sinatra appeared, went to the basement, was reprimanded by Fat Tony Salerno, and he suspected he was going to be killed, cried like a baby, begged for his life, and promised never to do and conduct himself in that manner again, and was released.
And you got this story from?
George Barone cooperated with me after we took down people in the Durso case. Durso was cooperating for a period of almost 3 years. Mm-hmm. And Durso was supposed to kill Barone. Patty Falsetti, Tommy Cafaro, and others were going to use Durso to kill Barone.
And that's years after the Sinatra incident.
Years after. Well, George went to prison for about 10, 12 years. And when he came out of prison, they were looking to use Barone's influence down in Florida, the piers with the Cubans, because George facilitated a lot of Cubans getting jobs at the piers there.
I want to back up just a little bit. So much of your investigation focused on the Genovese crime family. Can you talk a little bit about who they were, who they are, and what they specialized in some sense?
Well, going back to the days of the Genovese family, the original family after the Castle Maurice War, Lucky Luciano was the original boss. And I cite things that I find from an organized crime standpoint, the hypocrisy of that life, because your crime family is supposed to come before your blood family. And really, you don't realize it until you're deep in that life, the hypocrisy of the life, that, guys are constantly swindling each other. Your best friend is going to kill you. I mean, it's sort of ridiculous. But when you look at Luciano tried to create the commission where you had the 5 families, and that you could not kill a boss without getting the commission's approval. And so Luciano, like in 1936, he got charged with running prostitution rings. And this was fascinating to me, was Eunice Carter was the first African-American female prosecutor with the Manhattan DA's office and instrumental in getting the prostitutes to cooperate. Thomas Dewey gets, most of the credit for this prosecution of Luciano. And Luciano gets sentenced to like 30, 40 years in prison. Vito Genovese becomes the acting boss for Luciano while he's in prison. And a year or two later, Vito has to flee to Italy to avoid arrest for murder. And so he's out of the country. While he's out of the country, Frank Costello becomes the acting boss of the Genovese family. At some point, you have World War II. You've got so many things going on.
Yep.
Vito's over in Italy. He's becoming, he's basically walking between the raindrops, between Mussolini and the warrant for him. He's an interpreter for the U.S. Army. Eventually, the war ends. They realize there's a warrant for him. He gets deported back to the States. The witnesses on him on the murder case are all killed, so that gets dropped. But you have the bumping of the heads between Frank Costello and Vito Genovese because they were both acting bosses. And now who's the real acting boss?
Sure.
And that's where I look at things, when I try to place myself in that position of what a ridiculous concept, because it's supposed to be closer than your blood family. And it facilitates, when you look back, Albert Anastasia. Albert Anastasia was an underboss in what was known originally as the Mangano family. Vincent Mangano was the boss of that family, and Philip Mangano, Vincent's brother, was the consigliere, and Albert was the underboss. Well, Vincent Mangano disappeared, and Phil Mangano was found shot dead in Brooklyn. And who becomes the new boss of the family was Albert Anastasia, and I believe that was back in 1951. You can't whack a boss without getting the commission's approval, but apparently Albert didn't need it and did it. A few years later, in 57, when you have Costello and Vito Genovese bumping heads, Costello and Albert Anastasia meet with Michael Miranda, who's the consigliere of the Genovese family at that time, in a place in Brooklyn, a restaurant I believe it was in Greenpoint, where Durso's from.
Sure.
And at that meeting, they want to get Miranda to agree with their conspiracy to murder Vito Genovese and have Frank Costello replace him as the boss. Miranda just asked for a brief time to think about it before he gets back to them, immediately notifies Vito Genovese. Vito Genovese asks, is there any witnesses of this meeting? And they identify Sonny Francis, John Sonny Francis, a historic figure, Michael Francis's father.
Yep.
And obviously, Sonny Francis corroborates it. And shortly after that, that's where Chin is assigned to kill Frank Costello. And he shoots him in the head as he's entering, he's in the vestibule lobby of his building. Says, this is for you, Frank.
And of course, Chin becomes a focus of your investigation years and years later.
Yeah.
Can you talk so much of the history here? Well, what kind of crimes are we talking about here? I've heard the Genovese family described as the Ivy League of the mob because they were the ones who maybe weren't leaving the bodies all over the city, but kind of working some of the different unions or longshoremen. I mean, what kind of crimes are we talking about here?
When you go back and look at things that they're attached to, unions, the seaport, where the fish market is down there, you had South Sox Lands down there, And so they controlled, back in World War II, they were asking all the people from the unions when they're out at fishing ships to look for submarines, German submarines and others. You had the ports, the ILA. Historically, a decision was made between the families that Albert Anastasia and his family would control Brooklyn and Staten Island up the ports. And Manhattan and New Jersey would be the Genovese family, Lucky Luciano's family, Vito Genovese. When it went from loading ships manually, it seemed to be equal. But when it went to the containerization process in the 50s, I want to say, then new locals were being created. And George Barone was instrumental in that, to repair the containers, to offload the containers, to load the containers. And so New Jersey had all that land. When you go by the airport in New Jersey and the turnpike, you see all the containers. Brooklyn and Staten Island didn't have the land for it. So the membership of the unions that George helped create, George Barone, grew. And by the growth in those unions and others around the country, the Genovese family controlled the executive board of the International Longshoremen's Association.
We're talking about millions and millions of dollars that would come from organizations like this.
When you looked at the number of people that Cingiganti's family had, there was like 13 of them that had jobs that were making $430,000 a year without having to leave their house, paying $27 an hour a day, including the weekends. It was bizarre.
It's interesting, even as we're sitting here talking, you hear some of the names, a Luciano or Meyer Lansky or Mangano. I mean, names that you kind of hear if you've paid attention to pop culture, you've watched any of the mafia movies that have been out there. And some of that can be romanticized. But so much of your book is that is fiction, pure fiction in a lot of ways. And so much of what you see on the street and what you saw and what you heard in your recordings is betrayal and treachery.
Yeah. And some over for a modest amount of money. So I can see as a young kid, you making a name for yourself, that they sort of think you're a tough kid, you're loyal, and drawing you in to the life. And really, I made recordings where the gangsters that were in the life say, this isn't what you thought it was. They were almost discouraging D'Urso from not wanting to get into the life. And he had his experiences that I cite in the book that show the hypocrisy.
You tell a story in the book about Robert De Niro. Of course, Robert De Niro is iconic in the world of mafia movies. Jimmy Conway, Goodfellas, and A Bronx Tale.
Movie.
That is coming out. He's directing it. He's hosting a party down at his restaurant in Tribeca. You guys, the FBI guys, say,
well, it's right around the time,
hey, maybe we should go in here and see what's going on.
Well, I'm thinking, okay, what's the likelihood that guys at the social club at 171 Mulberry Street may be at this party because of the connection with the Genovese family and others, Colombo family, with Hollywood. So, and my social club at 171 had all 5 families initially coming there.
It's a big part of the story, yeah.
Yeah. And so we find a way to get into this. It's a funny story because we find a way to sort of get into this party. And we're at the Tribeca Grill, at De Niro's party. And we're looking around primarily for the wise guys. And it's open bar, free food, and there's just a handful of us. And a buddy of mine, Gary Ure, he ends up standing in the VIP section. Now, Gary's about 6'4", big guy, football player. And he's standing, I'm at the bar looking around. He's standing next to Patsy Perello, who is currently in the acting administration for the Genovese family. And Patsy has a phenomenal restaurant, Rigoletto's, up in the Bronx. And Gary calls me, Mike. And I look back, and he's standing next to Patsy. I can't believe it. And Gary towers over him, and Patsy's got a big smile on his face. Is he anybody? And I'm like, I shake my head, yes, and Patsy's got laughing. And then Gary, in his best impersonation of Joe Pesci, looks down at him and says, somebody knows you? And Patsy bursts out laughing. But at that point...
The gangster bursts out laughing.
He bursts out laughing. Because again,
he knows
Patsy...
He's made, so to speak. Or you guys are made, or something.
Yeah, so we can't hang around because they're going to say, don't come.
Wow. I read that, and I wanted to ask you about it. And I do want to get back to Durso because we've kind of talked around him for a little while, but
Very
really
bright guy.
he's at the heart of this story in the one of the, and there's a lot of cases, but really the big takedown here. Who is this guy and how did you get in touch with him? How did you find him?
So Durso frequented the social club 171 Mulberry Street. Monday nights, during football season especially, they'd have a card game that went to 4 a.m. Durso would be there with the DeCunto brothers, with his cousin Tino. And so I had surveillance. My whole thing is identifying them. But I didn't think much of them because they were young. I was more focused on the wise guys at the time. I subsequently learned, during that time frame, Durso got shot in the head at his social club in Greenpoint.
His cousin is killed.
His cousin's killed. And the whole process was Carmine Polito, Carmine Pizza. Now, Carmine Polito used to frequent the social club as well. And on Mondays before football and card games, Ali Shades Malangone, Baby Carmine Russo, Elio Albanese, Jerry Guadagno, they would all walk south on Mulberry Street and go to dinner at SPQR, I think. But they would go to dinners at Il Cortil or wherever, and then they return. So I always knew Carmine Polito and thought of him being affiliated with Ali Shades Malangone. I subsequently, working in conjunction with, I talk about the bank robberies in the book, where I parked down by Tribeca Grill, my bureau car in that area. I'm coming up to West Broadway, I believe it was, or Hudson, and I see Booby Sarasani. Now, Booby Sarasani was in Joe Pistone's book as the guy that he feared most because he tore apart his dashboard and looking for a bug initially when he was undercover. I knew, again, that he was going to prison in a few weeks because he frequented the social club. So one of my research is, all right, he's already going to prison. I'm thinking there's an armored car delivery being made. He's standing there, and I'm thinking he's going to do a robbery before he goes to prison because the investigation will probably take a while, and he's going to be in prison, and the money will be split. He's a Bonanno soldier. I go to the Bonanno family to tell him, look, I just observed Booby Sarasani. I think he's going to be doing a robbery at this bank. And they said, you're the second person. He was with other people. I contact the other agent who saw them. I had like 15 photos I put down. He picked the 3 guys that had frequented the social club that I was trying to put a wire in. These guys had come out once because I had a van parked right in front of the social club. I'm in the van. It's like 2 or 3 in the morning. They come out, and they're literally, I could have put my finger in their ear standing so close to the van talking about specifically, we need a van like this. We'll do the armored car robbery. I've been in shootouts before. We always have an insider. We need an insider. And all those details I included in my probable cause for the social club because they were talking about as they came out. Well, those guys that were next to the van a few weeks before my observation of Booby Sarasani were the same people that were meeting with Booby while the armored car delivery was occurring. And so they were. Carmine Polito, I mean, there were bank robberies we charged.
And Durso is connected to that in what way?
Well, Durso was asked by them because they robbed multiple banks. They robbed the bank next to Carmine Polito's pizzeria. They robbed the chemical bank right opposite up here in Midtown, Rockefeller Center area. I mean, they did that 2 days before Christmas.
Amazing.
They always had insiders. They robbed multiple banks. Jerry Guadagno's daughter-in-law was a teller at a bank. She left the door open to the teller area after a delivery was made. So that type of, opportunity. They were bank robbers. They do narcotics. There's all kinds of scams that they do. But Durso, when I took down the Ida case, Durso, who really a bright guy, bought real estate in Greenpoint section, multiple walk-ups or whatever. So he had money as a young kid in his 20s. He put the money up for Jimmy Ida's bail. I didn't know that till after, but Ida didn't make bail because of the murders we charged. The judge detained him. But I didn't know that till after he started cooperating. He started cooperating, Durso. So Durso, besides not being able to retaliate for his cousin's murder and his being shot in the head, made total sense because there was 5 people involved in that murder. And the likelihood you're going to kill all without somebody cooperating was very risky to the Genovese family. So the decision the Genovese family made not to retaliate at this time, put it on pause.
So essentially,
made sense.
If Durso would have retaliated, he would have had to kill too many people, and it would have just caused too many problems.
Right.
And I know you say in the book that you worked with tons of informants, but he was unique in the way that he was turned because he wasn't arrested. He didn't have pending charges.
He was arrested.
Well, they
didn't know about it.
That's not necessarily why he came to you in the first place.
Well, I believe what he said is he ran into a former prosecutor who was now a defense attorney. And this was at the time frame when he was having a dispute where his life was, again, possibly in jeopardy. And he just thought, this is a mess. It was just a few weeks before where I had information from another source about a threat to Sammy Meatball's life. Sammy Meatball's apparel, which was a mentor to Durso. And the person that provided Durso with money to put on the street as a loan shark. And when I met Sammy Meatballs that same day, Durso observed that Sammy seemed to be stressed, not his normal self, and asked what's wrong. And that's when he said and heard my name, Campi. Mike Campi was here, FBI agent, and said about the threat to his life. Durso associated the threat being affiliated with his incident with Frank Farby Serpico, who was the acting boss of the Genovese family at that time. I can go into that a little bit, but it was Sammy's conversation with Durso about, Durso said, well, who's Campi? And he said, Campi is who put Jimmy Ida, Barney Balomo, Mickey Domino in prison. That's when he thought, how does he meet Campi?
So he isn't necessarily someone who they might have thought would flip, so to speak,
No.
and that made him a very valuable source for you because
Right.
he was someone who was trusted.
And he was a bright guy. I mean, his schemes on how to make money.
How did he help you lead to so many arrests and indictments?
Well,
I know it's probably a long story, but
again, the premise of how we were doing things is when a topic would come up, we'd then follow up on it. And so there were opportunities that we could explore. For instance, I remember check cashing scheme where they were having a conversation about this corrupt check cashing facility, and the guy that had the association with him was a kid, Frankie the German Schwamborn.
this is in New York somewhere?
Well, the check cashing facility was in Jersey City. But according to Sammy was having a meeting with Frank Schwamborn regarding this check cashing guy. Nobody's supposed to meet him. And so they're telling Durso nobody's supposed to meet him. So I created a scenario to fund a bogus check as though this guy as an accountant where they don't have the controls in place is stealing loads of money. We can bang him through there where there's not going to be any trace and we get 10%. If I can convince the guy, well, who he's convincing is the FBI. I'm going to fund it. And so we needed a minimum of, I think, $130,000. And so we had discussions with Schwamborn and then facilitated a meeting with this individual, Santoro, that operated this check cashing facility. And it was really fascinating because we created a check backstop from the FBI, provided it to them to bang it through. But nobody was supposed to meet him because what they were doing was banging tens of millions of dollars in penny stock fraud from Wall Street through this location. And we ended up taking him down too in the future. But that was, as you're creating a conversation, you realize they've been getting away with this for a number of years. You just sort of think, okay, how do we get the details of the actual crime to generate the charges and the population of people attached to it?
The information that and the recordings, is that from Durso also, some of it?
All of it. Durso participated in the meetings, and we were going to,
And they had, and you keep going, and they had no idea still that Durso was involved. I mean, that's not the end of his involvement at
I'll
that
tell
point?
you, in the book I point out, Petey Red DiChiaro, who subsequently also became an acting boss, he was, when Ross Ganji went to prison, Petey, the capo position was offered to Joe Zito. Joe Zito turned it down and said, give it to Petey. Now, Petey Red would rely on Durso to consult with Patty Falsetti and others for messages to Ernie Muscarella, to the administration, on things that Petey Red was doing, rather than meet them himself, because he trusted Durso. Durso was bright, Durso was articulate, Durso was somebody that was connected to Patty Falsetti, who was, Patty Falsetti now I understand is the consigliere of the Genovese family, but Patty was with Barney Bellomo and Ernie Muscarella, the power now. And so they were using Durso to communicate their interests and disputes.
And you had him all along.
I had him. So it was like, this is a no-brainer. This is a layup.
From your perspective, how would you get people to turn on their family, so to speak? I mean, this loyalty concept. Yeah.
Well, in some instances, it would be as informants as opposed to as cooperators, but it would be just pointing out things like the hypocrisy of the life. I mean, the recordings and the information I know, they must know. Like, you get the sense that somebody doesn't like you. Well, on the street, you just walk away. But in that life, there's that jeopardy that your life may be, short-lived, that you may be killed. So it would be the type of thing where you can point certain things out that they may suspect or understand. Like, I mean, there were things that you can't be specific because you don't want, in some instances you can be specific because they already know, because a recording says that they already know. And that's where your friend wants to whack you, or your friend may whack you because... And
you present this evidence to them, and then they might say...
I would think, how do you want to deal with this? Do you want me to... I mean, in some instances, maybe I go to your house at 8 o'clock at night, knock on the door, introduce myself, have a conversation.
Introduce yourself as Mike Campi,
I'm Mike Campi, FBI, and this is what's in your future. And I'm going to identify... Well, that's another funny story that I do in the book. I went to somebody's house. I identified myself. I identified the fact that I will be arresting him in the future. I may say, a few months, when it could be a few weeks. And I, because of what he's done, he's exposed his boss to situations that may not please his boss because of the recordings and other evidence. And in that regard, he may decide to whack you. Or he may decide, that's it, you're done, whatever it is. So my decision is to see if you want to cooperate before going to prison, or do you want to cooperate after going to prison, or do you just want to go to prison and live a bizarre life as far as how you hurt this guy.
You've mentioned a lot of people, a lot of names.
Oh,
a boss here, an acting boss there, someone who's doing a scheme here. Are you a marked man at this point? They know your name. They know who you are. Do you think you have, even to this day, a bounty out in some way on who you are?
I don't, because I think the brighter guys realize, one, the risk factor, the stupidity of it. I mean, I remember when Everett Hatcher, the DEA agent, was killed. Every agency worked around the clock. I mean, the whole thing was, where is he? And the reality is it's a violation of their rules too, because it's counterproductive to their life. It would be stupid. I am, I'm aware, I'm alert. I carry. So that type of thing, I think, would be counterproductive.
Mafia Takedown, the incredible true story of the FBI agent who devastated the New York mob. Mike Campi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dan. I appreciate it.